It started with a knock that didn't echo, just a dull thud in the hallway of Daniel's apartment, the kind that shouldn't have meant anything, but he paused mid-brushstroke on the canvas, heart stalling, breath catching. Something about that knock wasn't right. It wasn't the sound. It was the stillness after, too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He stared at the door. One knock, then silence. He walked toward it slowly. No peephole, no shadow under the frame. Just wood and instinct and a voice inside that whispered, "Don't open it." He opened it anyway. No one there. Just an envelope on the floor, old yellowed. The name on the front written in fountain pen ink. That had bled at the edges. Daniel Carr, Subject 5B. He didn't remember falling backward, but the next thing he knew, he was sitting on the floor, holding the envelope in trembling hands. Subject. What did that mean? Inside was a single black and white photograph. A girl, no older than 11, dressed in outdated clothes. Lace collar, frayed hem, wide eyes like she hadn't blinked in decades. Behind her, a wall with flaking paint and a number stenciled above the door. 317. His apartment felt suddenly colder. He turned the photo over. In the same antique ink, Red Pines, Isolated Observation Ward. 1883, that made no sense. The paper wasn't 140 years old. It wasn't even brittle. He didn't remember anyone named Red Pines. Didn't know any little girl. But something in her face, that terrified plea in her eyes, stirred something at the base of his skull, like a dream you half remembered, only when sick, with fever. He reached for his phone, but the screen was cracked and dead. That was impossible. It was fully charged that morning. He stumbled to the sink, splashing water on his face, and when he looked up, there she was, in the mirror, just standing in the corner of the room behind him, silent, watching. He spun around. Nothing there. His chest rose and fell, like a hammer striking an anvil. The walls felt too close, the lights too dim. Something was happening, or had already happened, and for some reason, he knew the name now. Red Pines. Not a memory. Not quite. More like a weight that had always been there, waiting to be called by name. He pulled his coat off the hook and left his apartment, stepping out into the gray dusk. The letter and photo still clenched in his fist. Downtown, the Historical Archives building stood cold and square against the deepening fog. He didn't remember how he got there, only that he needed to find out if Red Pines ever existed. Inside, the air was dry and musty, like paper and time. A kind-eyed clerk led him into the public records room. He typed Red Pines into the database, and there it was. Red Pines Therapeutic Retreat. Established 1872, closed 1904. Location: rural countryside, unincorporated territory. Founder: Dr. Elias Vero. There were no photographs, just one scanned note in fragile cursive. Experiments in isolation yielded unpredictable results. Subject 5A exhibited profound temporal disassociation. Subject 5B remained non-responsive to traditional correction methods. Recommend euthanasia in future cases. Daniel's stomach flipped. He clicked through the rest of the file. Only scraps remained. A single line caught his eye. Room 317 sealed following incident. Entry prohibited by Varro's order. He blinked. Varro. He recognized the name, but not from this world. From dreams or nightmares. A voice, a gloved hand on his shoulder, a tone that said, "You don't want to misbehave, do you, Daniel?" He left the archive, the fog even thicker now. He should have gone home, but he didn't. He drove. He didn't remember the roads, but somehow they felt familiar, like a map he'd memorized in another life. Through winding countryside, past abandoned towns, deeper into the forgotten part of the county, and then through the trees. Half swallowed by vines and rot, it appeared red pines, or what was left of it. Tall iron gates hung open like broken wings. The building behind them was skeletal, a crumbling Victorian facade, windows blacked out or shattered, the main tower leaning slightly as if whispering secrets to the woods. Daniel stepped out of the car and walked toward the doors, not quite in control of his legs. The wood creaked beneath his hand as he pushed them open. Inside, it smelled like mildew, dust, and something older. He walked past rusted gurneys, leather restraints still attached. Old charts littered the floor. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper and hand-scratched messages he couldn't understand. Then he saw it, a door with stenciled numbers barely visible. He reached for the knob. It was cold, and it turned. But before he could push it open, a whisper right behind him. Soft, female. I didn't tell them. He turned. The hallway was empty, but the girl from the photograph now stood inside the window of room 317, looking out at him from behind the glass. Still, silent, unchanged, not aged a day. And her lips were moving, but no sound came. He stepped forward, ready to open the door. And that's when he saw something far worse than her face. A second figure, in the shadows behind her, tall, watching, and wearing a doctor's coat. Daniel stumbled back from room 317, heart pounding. The figure behind the girl hadn't moved, just stood there, tall and rigid, like it had been waiting a long time. He blinked once, gone. The girl, the doctor, the whole image behind the glass vanished like breath on a mirror. He stood there, in the hallway, caught between two versions of reality, the damp, creaking ruin around him and the impossible scene he'd just witnessed. He wanted to run, but something deeper inside him, something older, whispered, "You've been here before." He turned the knob again. This time, the door didn't resist. Inside, room 317 was choked with shadows and dust. A single iron-framed bed sat bolted to the floor, its leather restraints still buckled. The walls were covered in deep scratches, dozens, maybe hundreds, all made by fingernails. Daniel stepped inside. The air shifted, heavy and stale. It felt like stepping into someone else's lungs. Then he saw it, on the wall, near the bed, a small, rusted nameplate, half buried under debris. Subject 5B, Car D. His breath caught. That was his last name. But the date listed next to it was 1883. No, he whispered aloud. That's not possible. The numbers didn't make sense. It had to be a mistake. A sick prank. Someone messing with him. But when he reached out and touched the metal, it was ice cold, real, solid, anchored in place longer than he'd been alive. He turned to leave, and that's when he noticed the chair in the corner. Strapped to it, with dry-rotted buckles, was a leather-bound book, a journal, the initials on the cover, Evie Elias Varro. He took it, careful not to tear the ancient leather. Pages crackled as he opened it. The ink had faded, but the words were legible. June 18th, 1883. Subject 5A. Refuses to accept the procedure. Persistent hallucinations. Increasingly distressed by the presence of 5B. Their bond is a liability. June 20th, 5B responds only to repetition. Passive under mirror treatment. Hypnosis ineffective. Chemical therapy causes neural seizures. I must consult with Braithwaite regarding electrocorrection. Daniel's hand shook. Another entry. June 29th, the mirror shows signs of anchoring. 5A speaks to the glass. Says she sees her future. Says she sees him. The boy with paint-stained fingers. He dropped the journal. Paint-stained fingers. He was an artist. He'd never told anyone that. His mind reeled. Was this some kind of ancestral experiment? Some twisted bloodline echo? The room pulsed around him, as if waking up. The walls breathed. He had to leave. He turned, just as the sound of a child's voice whispered behind him, "Daniel?" His blood froze. It wasn't real. Couldn't be. But he looked anyway, and there she was. The girl from the photograph, sitting on the bed, as if she'd always been there. Her eyes weren't angry or afraid, just tired. "You came back," she said softly. Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. She tilted her head. "Do you remember me now?" "No," he said, though it felt like a lie. "Who are you?" She swung her legs over the edge of the bed. "You promised you'd come back for me, before they erased you." He backed away, shaking his head. "This isn't real. You're not real." "I'm still here because of you," she said. "They couldn't finish it. Room 317 was sealed before they could erase me." Then she pointed to the mirror, except there hadn't been a mirror before. But now there was one on the wall, full length, tall and ancient, its surface warped and rippling. In it, Daniel didn't see himself. He saw a boy, 11, wearing a patient's gown, hands trembling, and next to him, the same girl, holding his hand. Both of them inside a white room. He stepped toward the mirror, heart thundering. The girl on the bed whispered, "They called us delusional, said we were part of the hysteria, but we weren't sick. We were witnesses." "To what?" he breathed. "The experiments, the truth, what they did in the name of healing." Then her voice changed, lower, distant. "They'll come back for you now." The lights above flickered. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Not hurried, not loud, just steady, deliberate. Daniel turned, but the hallway was empty. Still, the steps grew, louder, closer. He grabbed the journal and bolted from the room, down the corridor, past the decaying stairwells and collapsed beams. The asylum groaned behind him, a hollow-boned relic filled with buried screams. He burst through the front doors into the moonless night. Rain had begun to fall, cold, sharp, cleansing, but his hands still trembled. He made it to the car, started the engine with shaking fingers. As he drove, he opened the journal again, flipping to the back. One final entry, July 3rd, 5B extracted. Project failed. 5A collapsed after separation. Neither retained full memory. Initiate mirror burial protocol. Underneath, scrawled in a different hand, shaky, rushed. They said it was therapy, but it was containment. We weren't patients. We were prisoners of the mind. Daniel pulled over to the side of the road, headlights cutting through fog like blades. He couldn't go back home. Not yet. He needed answers. Needed someone who knew about 1800s therapy protocols, asylums, Vero, and one name came to mind, Dr. Marin. He turned the car around and headed back to the city. The journal clutched tight, but he wasn't alone anymore. In the rearview mirror, just for a second, he saw the girl's reflection in the back seat, watching, waiting. Daniel didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again. He drove like he was outrunning a fever dream, every turn of the wheels slicing through something invisible yet alive. The silence in the car wasn't just quiet. It was held breath, the kind you find in places where things are buried, but not dead. Downtown, the city was just waking up. Lights flickered in office windows. Steam rose from manhole covers. And on the 6th floor of a brutalist brick building on South Varnum Street, a brass plaque read, Dr. Marin, Historical Psychiatry and Mental Institutional Practices, 1800, 1900. He hadn't spoken to her in over a year. They'd met during one of his art exhibits. She'd asked why all his paintings were of rooms. Empty ones, long hallways, broken furniture. He didn't know how to answer then. Maybe now he did. He rang the buzzer. Once, twice. Finally, a click. Her voice crackled through the speaker. Daniel? It's urgent. A pause. Then, come up. He took the old elevator, the kind that growled with every floor. She opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes were sharper than he remembered. Green, surgical. She took one look at him and frowned. You look like you haven't slept in a week. I don't think I've been awake in a week. He handed her the journal. She took it carefully, like it might explode. As she read, her expression changed from interest to concern to something colder, something like recognition. Where did you get this? She asked finally. Red Pines. Red Pines was leveled in 1910. No, it's still there. That's impossible. The state condemned it, buried the records. It was the center of what they called the quiet treatment method, early attempts at isolation therapy. She flipped through the pages. Dr. Elias Vero pioneered it. He believed madness was contagious through proximity, so he built entire wings where patients were kept completely isolated. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. What about subjects 5A and 5B? She hesitated, then pulled open a drawer and retrieved a thick folder labeled Classified Cases, Red Pines. This is off record, she said. I wasn't supposed to keep it. She laid out 2 photographs. A girl, a boy, both dressed in 1800s asylum garb. The girl was unmistakable. Daniel's throat closed. The boy, he hadn't seen him before, but somehow he knew him, knew the shape of the hands, the eyes. It's me, he whispered. Dr. Marin nodded slowly. These were taken in 1883. They were both part of something called the Mirror Protocol. Vero believed certain children had what he called reflective empathy. They could absorb the trauma of others. Daniel stared at the photo. They weren't being treated, Marin continued. They were being used. The goal was to isolate trauma in the mind of a reflector. Supposedly, Subject 5B could carry pain and remove it from others. But the more he carried, the more unstable he became, and eventually, they tried to erase him, Daniel said, finishing the sentence. Marin looked up sharply. You shouldn't remember that. He nodded slowly, voice hoarse. I didn't. Not until this week. Dr. Marin stood, walked to the window. Rain traced lines down the glass. There was a theory, she said, that in extreme cases, trauma isn't forgotten. It waits, buried in the body. The mind loops it, hides it, but the moment you return to the source, it begins again. She turned. You may not be Daniel Carr. Not really. He stared at her. What do you mean? Your records, your art, your dreams, they all orbit around isolation, memory, distortion. But what if you're not just remembering his life? What if you are him, preserved, transplanted, continued? That's impossible. Is it? She opened a drawer, pulled out a file. Inside, a certificate. Daniel Carr, born July 8th, 1993. Look at the hospital, she said. He read the name. Vero Memorial Psychiatric Maternity Ward. He dropped the paper. Marin knelt beside him. I think you were reborn in their image. A continuation of the experiment. Either you survived in 1883, or someone made sure the experiment did. He shook his head. No, I have a life. Memories. A mother. Have you ever seen her face? She asked quietly. He opened his mouth, froze. He couldn't picture her. Not her voice, not her laugh, only fragments. A hallway, a lunch tray, a locked door. It hit him like a migraine of the soul. What if your entire life was an observation chamber? She whispered. What if everything until now was room 317? He stood suddenly. The air felt thinner, the walls too white. Then Marin said one more thing. I know where the mirror is. He froze. What? The original one. The anchor used in the experiments. It was removed from Red Pines before it was shut down, moved to a collector's estate in upstate Maine. A private asylum turned museum, off limits to the public. Daniel turned slowly. Take me there. She nodded once. I'll drive. As they walked to the door, Marin grabbed her coat. Behind them, on the desk, the photo of the girl and boy sat in silence. But something had changed. The boy's eyes had turned, and now they were looking directly at Daniel. The drive to Maine felt like crawling backward through time. Each mile took them deeper into pine-choked forests, where cell signals vanished, and even the sky looked older, hung with low gray clouds like the asylum was calling them back in. The road twisted for hours, until finally they reached a rusted gate, flanked by two crumbling gargoyles. Marin parked the car. This is it, she whispered. The Alcott estate. Used to be an asylum. The mirror was moved here in 1911 under something called Project Echo. Daniel stepped out. The building beyond the gate wasn't a house. It was a monument to forgotten pain. 3 stories tall, covered in black ivy, windows sealed with wooden planks, carved with strange symbols. The wind whistled through the trees like a warning. A sign hung crooked near the path. Museum temporarily closed. Do not enter. but the padlock on the gate was already broken, as if someone had gone in before them. They pushed through. Inside, the house was colder than outside. The air was filled with the scent of mildew and copper, the kind of smell Daniel now associated with memory. Each room was preserved like a historical diorama: antique hospital beds, trays of outdated tools, jars filled with strange fluids, everything encased in a dusty glass. Then they reached a door marked simply the mirror room. Marin hesitated. If the original anchor is in there, it might still be active. Active how? Daniel asked. She glanced at him. Mirrors are memory traps. That was Vero's theory. They don't just reflect light, they store what they've seen. Daniel pushed the door open, and there it was, the mirror. It was 10 feet tall, framed in iron, twisted to resemble thorn-covered vines. The glass itself wasn't silvered. It was darker than night, like looking into the bottom of a well. Yet even in the dim light, Daniel could see faint shapes moving in it, flickering like candlelight underwater. Then he saw himself, but not the version he expected. The mirror showed him in a straitjacket, screaming, thrashing, blood around his mouth, eyes wild. No, he whispered. The reflection didn't mimic his movements. It watched him. Marin stepped beside him, studying the image. That's not you, she said. That's your stored self, the one they removed. Suddenly the mirror pulsed, like a heartbeat. Then the surface cracked, just a thin hairline fracture that ran from top to bottom. The room shook. The glass began to ripple, and from the depths of the mirror, something began to climb out, not with hands, not with a body. It was more like a presence, leaking through the crack, like black smoke. Then Daniel felt it, a cold hand on his shoulder. But Marin was in front of him. He turned slowly, and there she was, the girl, but older, no longer a child, young woman now, eyes hollow, face pale, hair matted to her skull like she'd been underwater for years. You left me, she said softly. Daniel stepped back, but his heel hit the edge of the mirror's frame. I didn't know, he said. I didn't remember. You promised, she said, voice cracking. Before the mirror took you. Behind her, shadows moved inside the glass. Hundreds of hands, faces pressed against the inner surface, screaming without sound. Marin grabbed Daniel's arm. We have to go. Now. But the girl stepped forward. No more running, she whispered. No more forgetting. Suddenly, her hands were on his temples. And just like that, the room vanished. Daniel was somewhere else. A white hallway, bright, lights, voices overhead. Men in white coats, dragging a boy toward a door. The boy fought back, screaming, No, don't take her. Don't lock us away. The door slammed. A number painted in red, 3117. Then darkness again. Another memory. He saw Vero standing at the foot of a hospital bed, the girl restrained. Electrodes on her temples. Subject 5A is resisting. Increase voltage, she screamed. Daniel tried to move, tried to shout, but he was only a witness. Then another flash. A room full of mirrors. Children sitting in chairs, staring into reflections while doctors scribbled notes. Over and over, the same phrase written in the margin. They do not see themselves. Daniel gasped, and the memory ended. He was back in the mirror room, on his knees, The glass was shattered. Now, the girl stood over him. Marin was gone. Where is she? Daniel asked, panicked. The girl said nothing. She held out a hand instead. And for the first time, Daniel noticed the mark on her wrist, a burn, in the shape of a number. 5A. He held up his own wrist. Another burn, faded, but still visible. B. They were the same. Mirror twins. Not biologically, experimentally. She helped him stand. They tried to erase us, but mirrors don't forget. And now, the walls around them began to fade. The furniture dissolved into dust. Now the mirror is breaking. What happens when it does? Daniel asked. Her eyes turned to the shards on the floor. Then we see what's really been hiding behind the glass. Suddenly, the largest shard of the mirror twitched, and from its cracked surface, a face began to crawl out. Not hers, not his, something else. Something with Vero's eyes, and a mouth that whispered, "You were never the patience. You were the cure." Daniel stepped back, but it was too late. The face was almost free. The shard split open with a shriek that wasn't sound. It was remembering, like every scream that had ever been swallowed inside that asylum, was pouring out through a single crack. Vero's face emerged first, though twisted, waxy, and wrong, as if it had been preserved too long in something unnatural. His mouth moved without breath, without lips, but Daniel heard the words deep in his bones. "You were designed to carry madness." Marin's voice came from behind, gasping, terrified. "Daniel, don't listen." She was back, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, mirror shards floated in the air, circling her body. Her eyes were wide, glassy. The mirrors weren't just reflecting. They were watching her. She came too close to the center. The girl whispered, "Now it sees her too." Daniel turned to the girl. "What is it?" She looked down at the largest shard, where Vero's shape twitched and spasmed, caught in some unnatural loop. "It's not Vero anymore. It's everything he forced into us. Every memory, every broken mind, sealed inside this mirror. It became something else, something hungry." The glass around the room cracked again. Slowly, the structure of the house began to peel, walls disintegrating, beams warping, as if rotting in fast forward. Dust fell like snow, and through it all, the mirror's voice grew louder. "Come home, 5B. Fulfill your purpose. Absorb it all. Take the weight." "No," Daniel muttered. "I won't." He stepped backward, but his foot struck something solid. Another mirror shard. It pulsed under his heel. Suddenly, his mind flipped. He wasn't in the house anymore. He was back in room 317, but not as a visitor. He was strapped to the floor. Hands yanked his head upward. Across from him, the girl, 5A, was screaming. Her chair sparked with electricity. Her mouth foamed. Her eyes rolled back, and Vero's voice echoed through the chamber. "She cannot carry it all. We divide the burden." Then the jolt, a blinding crack. Memory crashed into him like a tidal wave. Faces, voices, screams, the choking stench of ammonia, the rattle of bed frames at night, fingernails scraping at locked doors. He saw every patient Vero had ever condemned, every flicker of terror in those cold halls. He absorbed them, and something in him opened. Not pain, A container, a void shaped exactly like the suffering of others. That's what they made him into. Not a boy, a vault, a psychological incinerator. His eyes shot open. He was back in the ruined mirror room, but he remembered everything now. He looked at the girl. She smiled sadly. You see it now? I do. Another quake rocked the building. Dust rained down. A ceiling beam crashed to the floor beside them. We don't have long. Marin cried, crawling toward them. This place is collapsing. Daniel looked at the pulsing core of the mirror. What remained of it? Where Vero's face flickered in and out like a glitching memory. The entity that had become him. A parasite of pain. Can we destroy it? Daniel asked. The girl shook her head. No, but we can contain it. Together. He nodded once. She stepped closer, pressed her forehead to his. The pain came flooding in, but this time, it didn't consume him. He welcomed it. He became what they had tried to build, but not for them, for himself. A container, a mirror, a final stop for all that haunted Red Pines. The ground cracked beneath them. Glass shards lifted into the air, spinning faster and faster. Marin screamed, shielding her eyes. And then Daniel spoke. One final word, release. The mirror exploded. Light flooded the room. Not warm light, not even natural, but the raw, white-hot exposure of absolute memory. For a second, Marin saw everything. Children crying in corridors. Men locked in cells, rocking back and forth. A girl with burns on her wrists. A boy who stared into nothing for hours. And finally whispered, I remember who I was. Then, silence. When she woke, Marin was lying outside the estate. Smoke rose in the distance. The building was gone, reduced to splinters and ash. And Daniel was standing where the mirror used to be, eyes closed, still, like a statue, but in his chest, a faint light pulsed. The girl was gone. Or maybe not. Maybe she was in him now, stored, protected, remembered. Marin stood and walked toward him. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, they reflected her face. Not just a mirror, but recognition. He smiled softly. Room 317 is closed. Marin exhaled a breath. She didn't know she'd been holding. And the mirror? She asked. He looked toward the horizon, where the morning sun was finally breaking through the trees. Cracked, he said, but still watching. And with that, he turned and walked into the woods, alone but whole. The sun had barely risen when Daniel vanished into the dense woods, swallowed by the creeping fog that draped the forest like a shroud. Marin watched him go, the faint pulse of light beneath his shirt still visible, a heartbeat tethered to a secret too heavy to carry alone. She wiped the sweat from her brow, the morning chill already biting at her skin, and turned back toward the ruined estate. Only ash and splinters remained where the mirror once loomed, a monument to decades of torment, now reduced to dust. But as she moved through the rubble, something glinted in the rubble. An old, cracked photograph, half buried beneath a broken floorboard. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was a group portrait, men, women, and children lined up outside the asylum, faces blurred by time, but their eyes burning with a haunting intensity. At the center stood Vero, his posture rigid, eyes cold and calculating, and at the edges, two children, hands linked tightly, a girl and a boy. Their wrists bore the faint scars of something unspoken. Marin's breath caught. The girl from the mirror, Daniel, the mirror twins, born not of blood, but of cruelty. Her mind raced. What had Vero truly been after? What was this cure he spoke of? And how deep did the darkness run? The forest around her seemed to close in, whispers threading through the branches like forgotten memories stirring awake. The mirror was broken, but its shadows remained, lurking in every crack, in every reflected surface. Marin's hand clenched the photograph as a new resolve took hold. She wouldn't let this end here. Daniel had carried the weight. Now it was her turn to face the darkness left behind. Behind her, a glint of glass caught the light. Something smaller, half buried beneath the moss. A shard from the mirror, black and pulsing faintly. And as she reached down to pick it up, a cold voice whispered through the trees. You cannot escape the reflection. The whisper echoed through the cold morning air, lingering like a ghost's breath. Marin froze, heart hammering, as she scanned the tree line, but saw only shifting shadows and skeletal branches swaying in the wind. She clutched the shard tighter. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat syncing with her own. You cannot escape the reflection. The voice was neither male nor female. It felt ancient, an echo from the abyss between worlds, a remnant of the horrors sealed in the mirror. Her breath formed mist as she moved away from the ruins, back toward the dirt road. Each step felt heavier, weighed down by the shard's strange warmth against her palm. As she walked, the forest grew darker, the sunlight struggling to break through thickening clouds. The trees seemed to lean closer, whispering secrets she could almost understand. Suddenly, the shard flickered in her hand, projecting an image like a flickering film. A boy, younger Daniel, sitting alone in a padded room, his eyes wide, terrified. The door slammed shut. Please, the boy whispered, remember me. The vision dissolved, leaving Marin breathless and shaking. She glanced at the shard, now cool and inert. A choice settled over her. Destroy this remnant of madness, or dive deeper into the abyss it guarded. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. They're coming for you next. Her blood ran cold. She wasn't just carrying a shard. She had inherited a curse, and the real nightmare was only just beginning. Marin's fingers trembled as she stared at the message. They're coming for you next. The words hung in the air, a chilling promise that pulled the shadows closer around her. She stuffed the shard deep into her jacket pocket, feeling its pulse slow to a steady thrum, like a heartbeat matched to her own fear. The road stretched ahead, empty and silent, except for the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. But somewhere, deep in the woods, something watched. Her phone buzzed again. A second message. You can't run from what's in the glass. Panic clawed at her chest. She quickened her pace, trying to shake the oppressive weight of those words. But her mind replayed everything. The broken mirror, the girl, Daniel's haunted eyes, the echoes of a past no one wanted to remember. Marin's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement in the trees. A flicker of motion, a shadow slipping between trunks. She stopped. Hello? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. No answer. The forest was alive with silence, but the silence was unnatural. It pressed on her ears, making her heart beat louder in her chest. Her breath caught as a figure stepped onto the road ahead. Tall, thin, dressed in a worn lab coat stained with age and neglect. The man's face was obscured by shadow, but his eyes, sharp, cold, and calculating, locked onto hers. Marin, he said, voice low and gravelly. You don't know what you're carrying. She took a step back. Who are you? He smiled, a thin, mirthless curl. Someone who knew Vero better than you ever will. And someone who knows what's trapped inside that shard. Marin's pulse quickened. What do you want? To warn you, he said. The mirror's pieces aren't just fragments of glass. They're fragments of souls, broken, fractured by experiments that went too far. He stepped closer, voice dropping. And now, those souls want to be whole again. Before she could react, the man extended his hand. Come with me, if you want to survive. Marin hesitated, torn between fear and desperate hope. Then, with a determined breath, she nodded. The forest swallowed them both, and the hunt began. The man led Marin through tangled underbrush and over gnarled roots, his pace steady but urgent. The sun had disappeared entirely behind a bank of heavy clouds, plunging the woods into a gray gloom that seemed to swallow sound itself. Marin's heartbeat thundered in her ears, matching the rhythm of the shard pressed deep against her chest. Why are you helping me? She finally asked, voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. He glanced back, his sharp eyes glinting beneath heavy brows. Because I once believed in Vero's promise, that madness could be cured, but I saw what it really meant, what it cost, and now I'm trying to stop it from spreading. Marin swallowed hard. What happened to you? A flicker of pain crossed his face. I was one of Vero's first subjects. I escaped, but only barely. The mirror wasn't just a tool. It was a prison. It trapped the minds of those it claimed, twisting them into something else. And every shard holds a piece of that darkness. They reached a clearing where an old, rusted metal door was embedded into the hillside, half covered in ivy. The man pulled a set of keys from his coat and unlocked it with a practiced hand. Inside is what's left of Vero's research. It's where the asylum's secrets still breathe. If you're going to fight this, you need to see it for yourself. The door groaned open, revealing a stairwell descending into darkness. Marin hesitated, then followed him down into the bowels of the earth. The air grew cold and damp, thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten time. Flickering fluorescent lights struggled to illuminate peeling walls, lined with rusted cages and broken instruments. Look around, the man said. This was where they kept the unstable, where they experimented on patients who resisted the mirror's pull. Marin's gaze fell on a wall covered in faded photographs, faces of men, women, and children, frozen in terror and despair. Vero promised a cure, the man whispered, but all he did was trap them. Their minds fractured, their souls shattered. The mirror was meant to contain the chaos, but instead it fed on it. A sudden noise echoed from deeper within the tunnels, a soft rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against glass. They froze. The man's eyes narrowed. You hear that? They're still here. Marin's blood ran cold. Something unseen was watching, waiting, and the real nightmare was just beginning. The tapping grew louder, echoing off the cold stone walls, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Marin's breath hitched as she peered into the shadows ahead, where faint glimmers flickered beyond the broken glass of rusted cages. Who's there? She called, voice trembling but steady. Silence answered. Then a soft, almost mournful voice whispered back, help us. From the darkness emerged figures, hollow-eyed, gaunt, their movements slow and shuffling. They wore tattered remnants of hospital gowns stained with time and neglect, faces etched with a sorrow that felt endless. Marin's stomach twisted. These were the lost souls Vero had trapped, the patients swallowed by the mirror's madness. The man stepped forward cautiously. They're trapped in the echoes, caught between worlds by the shards. One of the figures, a woman, lifted a trembling hand toward Marin. Please, she pleaded, voice fragile. Free us. Daniel's words from before echoed in Marin's mind, a container, a final stop. She looked at the shard in her pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. We have to finish what he started, she said, voice fierce. We have to close the mirror. For good. The man nodded grimly. But to do that, we need to find the heart of the asylum, the core where Vero bound the mirror's power. Suddenly, a deafening crack shook the tunnels. Dust rained from the ceiling as distant screams filled the air. They're coming, the man said, urgency sharp in his eyes. We don't have much time. Marin swallowed her fear and steeled herself. The echoes of the asylum were rising, and the mirror was fighting back. The clang of distant metal echoed through the tunnels, a harsh reminder that time was slipping away. Marin's footsteps rang against the cold stone as she followed the man deeper into the bowels of the old asylum. The flickering overhead lights cast twisted shadows on the walls, ghostly hands reaching for them, grasping at the edges of reality. She gripped the shard in her pocket, its pulse sinking with the pounding of her heart. It was more than a fragment of glass. It was a piece of every fractured soul trapped in this nightmare. Every scream, every broken mind, every stolen moment of sanity. The man's voice was low but urgent. We're close. The core chamber is beneath the old treatment wing, where Vero performed his final experiments. If we destroy the anchor point, the shards lose their power. The echoes can be freed. Marin swallowed, her throat dry. What exactly happened here? What did Vero do? He paused, glancing over his shoulder with haunted eyes. He believed madness was a contagion, something that could be isolated and extracted. The mirror was his tool, designed to absorb and contain the broken minds of his patients. But it became more than that. It became a prison, a vessel for their suffering. And in trying to contain madness, he created a monster. They reached a heavy steel door, rusted and warped, but still formidable. The man pulled out a battered keychain and unlocked it with a harsh click. The door swung open to reveal a chamber bathed in sickly yellow light. Inside, the walls were lined with mirrors, fragments of varying sizes pieced together like a grotesque mosaic. At the center stood a large, cracked mirror, its surface swirling with dark, twisting shapes. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, thick and suffocating. Marin stepped forward, heart racing, the shard in her pocket flared hot, almost burning through the fabric. She pulled it out and held it up to the larger mirror. The fragments resonated, their surfaces vibrating in response. Varro's heart, the man whispered, the core of the mirror's power. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the chamber. The shards on the walls rippled, distorting the reflections. From the depths of the large mirror, a face emerged, twisted, snarling, eyes burning with hatred. It was Varro, or what was left of him, a ghost trapped in the prison he created. "You cannot destroy me," the apparition hissed, voice echoing like shattering glass. "I am the madness. I am the cure." Marin's breath caught. The shards began to pulse faster, and the reflections warped into twisted scenes of pain and despair. Patients screaming, faces melting, bodies convulsing in torment. The man grabbed her arm. "We have to break the core, or this nightmare will never end." Marin nodded, steeling herself. She raised the shard and brought it crashing down on the large mirror. The glass exploded, shards flying like shards of light and shadow. The chamber shook violently as the reflections fractured and shattered. Varro's scream echoed in the broken glass, fading into silence. The oppressive weight lifted from the air, replaced by a fragile stillness. Marin staggered back, chest heaving. The shards in her hand were cool now, inert. The man smiled faintly, relief washing over his face. "It's over. The echoes are free." But as Marin looked around the ruined chamber, a faint shimmer caught her eye. A single shard, untouched, glowing softly on the floor. A cold whisper brushed her ear. "You can't escape the reflection." The clang of distant metal echoed through the cold tunnels, a harsh reminder that time was slipping away. Marin's boots struck the cracked stone floor with a steady rhythm, each step reverberating like a heartbeat inside the suffocating silence. The air was thick, heavy with dust and forgotten memories, a scent that clung to the skin like a shroud. Ahead, the man who had become her reluctant guide moved with practiced urgency, weaving through the labyrinthine passages of the long-abandoned asylum. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead sputtered weakly, casting fractured shadows that danced on peeling walls stained with decades of neglect. Broken equipment lay strewn about like the carcasses of a bygone era. Rusted wheelchairs, shattered syringes, and frayed electrical cords snaking like dying veins. Marin clutched the shard nestled in the inner pocket of her jacket. Its faint pulse seemed to synchronize with the pounding of her heart. This piece of mirror was no ordinary glass. It carried the weight of countless souls trapped in this place, their anguish etched into its surface like invisible scars. Every flicker of light on the shard whispered stories of madness and despair. Varro's core chamber is just ahead, the man said, voice low and grim. His eyes, sharp beneath furrowed brows, flicked nervously over his shoulder. If we destroy the anchor point where he bound his experiments, the shards will lose their power. and the echoes will be free. Marin swallowed the lump in her throat, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. Tell me everything, she said, voice barely above a whisper. What did Vero really do here? The man sighed, a haunted look clouding his gaze. He was a man obsessed, a doctor who believed madness was like an infection, something that could be isolated, extracted, and cured. The mirror was his instrument of healing. It was meant to absorb the fractured minds of his patients, to contain their pain and disorder in a single vessel. His voice cracked, heavy with regret, but it became something else, a prison for their souls. Each shard you carry holds a fragment of their suffering, and Vero, he became a ghost trapped in his own creation, a dark presence feeding on the madness he sought to contain. They paused before a heavy steel door, its surface pitted and rusted by time. The man pulled a battered keyring from his coat, rattling a handful of keys before selecting one with care. The lock clicked open with a finality that echoed down the hallway. Marin pushed the door ajar, revealing a vast chamber bathed in sickly yellow light. The air was thick, electric, with a strange energy that prickled the skin and weighed on the lungs. The walls were covered with broken mirrors, shards of various sizes pieced together like a grotesque mosaic. At the center stood the largest mirror of all, its surface cracked and swirling with dark, twisting shadows. Marin stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the swirling abyss in the glass. The shard in her hand flared suddenly, burning hot against her palm. She raised it, pressing the fragment to the surface of the larger mirror. The shards vibrated in response, resonating with an eerie harmony. A low hum filled the chamber, growing louder with every passing second until it became a deafening roar. Suddenly, the surface of the mirror rippled and twisted. From within, the glass emerged a face, twisted, snarling, eyes burning with cold malice. It was Vero, or what remained of him, a wraith imprisoned by his own ambition. You cannot destroy me, the apparition hissed, voice like the shattering of glass. I am madness incarnate. I am the cure you fear to face. Marin's breath caught in her throat as the shards on the walls began to pulse wildly, distorting the reflections into nightmarish scenes. Faces twisted in agony, screams frozen in time, bodies contorted in impossible ways. The man grabbed her arm, his grip tight and urgent. We have to shatter the core, or this darkness will consume everything. Steeling herself against the terror flooding the room, Marin raised the shard high and brought it crashing down on the central mirror. Glass exploded into 1,000 pieces, shards flying like stars scattering across the void. The chamber shook violently, and the air was ripped by a scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Vero's face fractured and dissolved into shadow. The oppressive energy shattered like a bubble, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against their ears. Marin stumbled back, heart pounding, lungs gasping for air. The shards in her hand were cool now, dormant and lifeless. The man exhaled slowly, relief washing over his face. It's done. The echoes, they're free. But as Marin scanned the ruined chamber, her eyes caught a faint glimmer on the cracked floor. a single shard, untouched and glowing softly with a sinister light. A whisper brushed against her ear, colder than the grave. You cannot escape the reflection. The silence that followed the shattering of the mirror was thick, almost suffocating. Marin's breath came in shallow gasps as her eyes locked onto the single shard glowing faintly on the floor, its eerie light pulsing like a heartbeat of some hidden horror. She stepped forward cautiously, her instincts screaming that this fragment was far from harmless. The man beside her, his face etched with exhaustion, but eyes still sharp, lowered his voice to a grave whisper. That shard, it's the last piece Vero sealed himself inside. His essence, his madness, all trapped in that tiny fragment. If it breaks free, everything we've fought for will unravel. Marin's fingers twitched, tempted to reach out and touch it, but she forced herself to step back instead. The air grew colder, the shadows around them deepening into unnatural shapes that seemed to twist and writhe just beyond the edges of her vision. We need to take it somewhere safe, she said, voice steady, despite the dread curling in her gut. Someplace it can't hurt anyone. He nodded, producing from his coat a small, heavy box lined with lead, an old containment vessel designed to trap psychic energy. This is the only thing that might hold it. As Marin lifted the shard, the room trembled again, dust falling from the ceiling. A distant wail echoed through the tunnels, a sound so filled with anguish it clawed at her heart. We don't have much time, the man warned. The asylum is waking. The echoes are growing restless, and Vero's presence is trying to break through. Together, they made their way back through the twisting corridors, the shard securely locked inside the box. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every distant sound amplified in the heavy silence. Suddenly, a violent crash echoed from behind them. They spun around, hearts pounding, to see one of the cages had been ripped from the wall, its door swinging open like a mouth, ready to swallow. From the darkness stepped a figure, twisted and broken, a patient lost long ago, now a ghostly specter of pain and madness. His eyes glowed faintly with the same light as the shard. You carry his peace, the apparition hissed. You carry his curse. Marin swallowed hard, but stood her ground. We're ending this. No more suffering. The specter lunged, a wail piercing the tunnel as it reached for the box. The man shoved Marin aside and grabbed a rusted pipe lying nearby. Swinging it with desperate strength, the ghostly figure recoiled, dissolving into mist before vanishing into the walls. Breathing heavily, Marin met the man's eyes. This isn't over. He nodded grimly. No, but we're closer. They pressed onward, each step heavier than the last, as the asylum's dark heart pulsed beneath them. Somewhere deeper, the core of Vero's madness still throbbed, waiting, watching, ready to reclaim what had been shattered. Marin's grip tightened on the box, the shard inside humming softly, as if alive. Whatever lay ahead, she knew this was only the beginning of a far greater nightmare. The air grew colder as Marin and the man descended deeper into the bowels of the asylum, the flickering lights above barely penetrating the thick darkness surrounding them. Each step echoed hollowly off the damp stone walls, carrying with it the weight of centuries of suffering. The shard, now secured inside the lead-lined box, seemed to thrum faintly, an ominous heartbeat pulsing through their fingers. According to the records I salvaged before the place was sealed, the man whispered, there's a hidden chamber beneath the eastern wing. Varro's last and most dangerous experiment was conducted there. If we're going to end this nightmare, that's where we must go. Marin nodded, tightening her grip on the box. She could feel a magnetic pull toward the chamber, an invisible thread tugging her deeper into the asylum's dark core. Her mind raced, haunted by the faces she had seen earlier, the hollow-eyed patients, the tortured expressions frozen forever on peeling photographs, the echoes of screams lingering like ghosts in the air. Why did Varro think he could control the madness? Marin asked quietly. The man's jaw clenched because he believed madness was a disease, something external that could be isolated and destroyed. But what he didn't understand was that madness isn't just a thing to be removed. It's part of us, a reflection of the chaos inside. A sudden shudder ran through the floor beneath their feet. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in tiny avalanches as a distant, agonized wail echoed through the tunnels. Marin's heart hammered in her chest. We're close, the man said, eyes sharp as he held a flashlight steady. Stay alert. As they turned a corner, the narrow corridor opened into a vast chamber carved from rough stone. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something metallic. Blood, perhaps, or rust. At the center stood a massive contraption, an amalgamation of mirrors, wires, and strange mechanical devices. It pulsed with an eerie blue light, casting fractured reflections that shimmered like liquid glass. Marin's breath caught. This had to be the heart of the asylum, the machine Varro had used to amplify his twisted experiments. Varro's mirror array, the man said reverently. It wasn't just a mirror, it was a gateway, a funnel for madness itself. Marin stepped forward cautiously, her eyes scanning the intricate framework. The mirrors reflected distorted images of the chamber, each one more nightmarish than the last. Faces twisted in silent screams, limbs contorted in impossible angles, shadows moving with unnatural grace. The shard inside the box vibrated sharply. Marin lifted the lid slowly, revealing the fragment glowing faintly, a sliver of light swallowed by the darkness. We need to destroy the array, she said, voice firm. If we shatter it, we cut off the source of the madness. The man nodded, pulling a heavy crowbar from his pack. I'll handle the framework. You prepare the shard. Marin's hands trembled as she stepped closer to the array, feeling a cold energy radiating from the mirrors. Her mind flickered with fleeting images, ghostly faces, desperate hands reaching out, whispers curling like smoke. Be careful, the man warned. The array can trap you, distort your mind. Varro built it to protect itself. As the man pried at the fragile joints of the mirrors, a low hum filled the chamber. The air thickened, oppressive and suffocating, like a storm building beneath the earth. Suddenly, the largest mirror at the center rippled and darkened. The surface twisted, swirling with shadows until a pair of eyes appeared, cold, calculating, and filled with infinite malice. Fools! The voice slithered through the chamber, chilling and hollow. You cannot undo what I have wrought. Marin's breath caught in her throat as the shard flared bright in her hand, burning with a fierce, unearthly light. The reflections around them began to warp violently, faces distorting into monstrous visages, reaching out like claws from the glass. The man swung the crowbar with a grunt, shattering one of the smaller mirrors. A shock wave rippled through the room, sending shards of glass cascading like deadly rain. Marin raised the shard high and smashed it against the central mirror. The glass exploded, shards flying in all directions, their edges gleaming with fractured light. The oppressive energy shattered like a broken spell, the chamber shaking violently as the walls seemed to tremble. The voice screamed, a sound of fury and defeat, then faded into an agonized silence. Marin staggered back, panting, heart pounding fiercely. The man lowered the crowbar, sweat streaming down his face. "It's done," he said, voice hoarse. "The source is broken." But as Marin looked around the ruined chamber, faint shimmer caught her eye, a thin line of light tracing the edges of the largest shard still embedded in the floor. It pulsed softly, almost defiantly. A whisper curled through the air, barely audible, yet laden with menace. "You cannot destroy what is part of you." Marin's hand tightened on the box. The shard inside pulsed once more, a steady, haunting heartbeat. Outside, the asylum groaned, the earth itself seeming to resist the destruction within. "We need to leave," the man said urgently, "before the place collapses." They hurried back through the winding tunnels, the oppressive darkness closing in behind them. Every step was a battle against the shadows that sought to consume their sanity. Every breath struggle against the chilling cold that seeped into their bones. As they neared the exit, the ground trembled violently. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling, forcing them to duck beneath broken pipes and crumbling beams. Suddenly, shadow lunged from the darkness, a twisted figure, its eyes burning with a mad light. It reached for the box in Marine's hands, snarling. The man shoved Marine aside and swung his crowbar with desperate strength. The figure recoiled, dissolving into mist, before vanishing into the walls. Breathing heavily, Marin met the man's gaze. "This isn't over." He nodded grimly. "No, but we're closer." They emerged into the damp night air outside the asylum, the moon casting cold light on the ruined facade. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant howl of wind through broken windows. Marin took a deep breath, the shard still humming softly in the box. Whatever Varro had unleashed was fading for now, but the darkness lingered, a shadow waiting just beyond the edge of light, and the reflection was far from broken. The night air was sharp and biting as Marin and the man stood outside the asylum's shattered gates, the cold wind tugging at their coats like restless spirits. The lead-lined box felt heavier in Marin's hands now, its ominous hum a constant reminder that the nightmare was far from over. Behind them, the asylum loomed like a dying beast, its shattered windows staring blankly into the dark like hollow eyes. Marin's mind replayed the horrors they had witnessed, the twisted reflections, the trapped souls, the relentless pull of madness. But amid the terror, one thought echoed louder than the rest. What was the true nature of the shard? What dark secret did it still hold? "We need to find a place where this can be contained," Permanently, she said, voice low but resolute. Somewhere no one can ever touch it again. The man nodded slowly. There's a sanctuary, an old underground vault, built for exactly this kind of thing. It was designed to hold dangerous artifacts, locked away from the world. Marin felt a flicker of hope. Then that's where we go. They moved swiftly through the night, the city around them strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. The streets were slick with recent rain, reflecting the faint glow of distant streetlights. Every shadow seemed to twitch and writhe with unseen life, but neither spoke of the creeping unease. As they approached the vault, nestled beneath a forgotten church, the hum from the box grew louder, almost unbearable. Marin's fingers tightened around the handle, the shards pulsing, syncing with her own racing heartbeat. The vault door groaned open with a rusty screech, revealing a chamber lined with reinforced steel walls and ancient locking mechanisms. The air inside was dry, sterile, an unsettling contrast to the asylum's oppressive decay. Marin carefully placed the box on a pedestal in the center, surrounded by wards and seals etched into the floor with glowing runes. The man began the ritual to activate the seals, chanting softly under his breath. As the runes flared to life, the shard's glow intensified, casting strange shadows that twisted and writhed along the walls. The hum escalated to a piercing pitch, then suddenly ceased. The box snapped shut, its lock clicking with finality. For a moment, the chamber was silent, and then a faint whisper, barely audible, brushed past their ears. You cannot bury the reflection. Marin shivered, but forced herself to turn away. It's contained. For now. The man nodded. Exhaustion etched into his features. But the cost of meddling with the mind is never simple. Madness always finds a way. As they left the vault, Marin glanced back once more, the shard's faint glow flickering beneath the seals. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, washing the world in pale gold. Marin breathed deeply, the weight of what they had done settling on her shoulders. The asylum was silent, but in the shadows, a mirror trembled. The reflection was watching. Marin didn't sleep that night. She sat alone, on the edge of a rusted bench just outside the vault's entrance, arms folded, staring into the dull glow of an old street lamp. The cold seeped into her bones, but she didn't notice. Her mind was still inside the asylum, trapped between mirrors, caught in the echo of screams that hadn't belonged to her, yet had whispered her name. The man, Isaac, she now knew, had gone to report the successful containment. The agency he worked for, shrouded in secrecy and dread, would likely try to bury this incident, like they had so many others. Seal the vault, destroy the records, pretend Vero never existed. But Marin knew better. The whisper had followed her. That night, as dawn slowly claimed the rooftops, she walked to her apartment with slow, heavy steps. The city was waking up, newspapers landing on doorsteps, shutters lifting, a few early risers jogging past without seeing the haunted look in her eyes. Inside her apartment, she locked the door and turned every mirror to face the wall. She sat in silence for hours, eyes fixed on her reflection in the dark window, waiting for it to move. Without her, it didn't. Not yet. But deep down, she felt it. Something had changed. That night, it happened. At 2:13 a.m., She was woken by a cold breath brushing her cheek. Her eyes snapped open. The room was still, her curtains unmoving, but her mirror, one she had forgotten in the hallway, was glowing faintly. She rose slowly, her breath fogging in the icy air. She approached the mirror. Her reflection blinked. But she hadn't. Marin stumbled back, heart pounding. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and then her own face leaned forward, eyes empty, and her mouth stretched into a silent scream. Then it was gone. The glass was normal again. She couldn't sleep after that. She smashed the mirror with a hammer, then every other mirror in the apartment. She unplugged her television, covered the windows with newspaper, but the reflections kept appearing, in puddles, in polished doorknobs, even in her own eyes. By the third day, her hands were shaking. She hadn't eaten. Her voice sounded hollow, unfamiliar. Isaac came by once, saw the broken glass and newspaper, and didn't say a word. He simply handed her a sealed envelope. "This came from the vault," he said, "and I think you should read it." Then he left. Marin stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before opening it. Inside was a faded photograph, sepia-toned, the corners torn. It showed Vero standing in the asylum's main hall, flanked by two other figures. One of them was clearly the woman from the cell, the one who'd warned her. The other looked disturbingly like Marin. She turned the photo over, scrawled on the back in jagged ink. "Time doesn't reflect. It folds." Marin's blood ran cold. She checked the date stamped on the bottom right corner. 84. That night, she went back to the asylum. The gates were padlocked, the building cordoned off with metal fencing, but she found a hole near the west wall, just wide enough to slip through. The place had changed. The moment she stepped inside, the air grew thick and still. Dust floated in slow motion. The halls were strangely clean, the walls no longer peeling. Lights buzzed faintly above, casting a soft, golden glow. She wasn't in the present anymore. Somehow, the building had pulled her back. She moved through the halls with a growing sense of unease. There were voices now, soft, murmuring conversations from rooms just out of sight. Footsteps echoed behind her, but whenever she turned, no one was there. Then she saw herself, at the far end of the hallway, walking calmly in a white patient's gown. Marin froze. The other her stopped, slowly turning her head. Same face, same eyes, but hollow, empty. The double smiled and disappeared into the floor. Marin ran. She burst through doors, retracing the path to the mirror chamber. But it wasn't ruined anymore. It was intact, whole. Standing at the center, adjusting the machine, was Vero. He looked up, unsurprised. "I wondered when you would return," he said calmly, his voice as smooth as silk. The mind always circles back to its greatest wound. Marin stepped forward slowly. "What is this place? What did you do?" Vero gestured around the chamber. "This is the core, the reflection behind all mirrors. This is where I learned that time is just a lie we tell ourselves to stay sane." She shook her head. "You're dead. I destroyed you. You shattered a piece," he said, smiling faintly. "But the mind isn't a mirror you can break and forget. Pieces remember. Pieces reflect." He turned toward the machine, fingers caressing its controls. "You came here looking for truth, but truth is recursive. The more you chase it, the deeper it goes, and eventually you find yourself. Marin felt it then. The pull. The shard wasn't in the vault anymore. It was inside her, and it was waking up. She fell to her knees, hands clutching her head, as the voices returned, screaming, whispering, laughing. Visions flickered before her eyes, hundreds of versions of herself, trapped behind glass, screaming to get out. Vero's voice echoed in the dark. You were always the key, Marin. You were always the patient. The mirrors around her began to crack, but she stood up slowly, blood running from her nose, eyes wide and wild. I'm not your subject, she said. I'm the one who remembers. Then she charged at the machine. Vero didn't move. With a roar, she threw herself against the controls, yanking wires, smashing mirrors. The machine sparked violently. The room howled as the reflections screamed in unison, and everything went white. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of erasure, the kind that follows an explosion so vast it devours sound, light, and memory. Marin floated in it, disembodied, her thoughts untethered from time or space. She wasn't sure if she was dead or dreaming, falling or floating. Then, breath, hers, shallow, raspy, real. Her eyelids fluttered open. She was lying on cold, polished tiles. Beneath a flickering fluorescent light, the room was empty. The mirror machine was gone. The walls were smooth, white, sterile. She sat up. Something was wrong. The world felt too clean, too silent. No wind, no smells, no sensation of temperature. Just a kind of clinical detachment, like a memory of a hospital that had never been touched by time or life. Where? She whispered. Her voice echoed endlessly, swallowed by the walls. Footsteps clicked behind her. She turned. A woman stood there, wearing a lab coat, clipboard in hand, face perfectly symmetrical, lips unmoving even as words came out. Subject 42 is awake, the woman said. Marin staggered to her feet. What is this? Where am I? The woman did not blink. You are in Observation Ward 7. Please remain calm. You experienced an unscheduled cognitive collapse during immersive therapy. We are resetting your orientation loop. Resetting what? Marin backed away, heart pounding. No, I destroyed the machine. I broke the loop. You were not in a loop, the woman said smoothly. You were in simulation. Your reality was part of a controlled delusion, administered for psychological data collection. You volunteered. I volunteered? Marin's voice cracked. But somewhere, in the back of her mind, a terrible seed of doubt began to sprout. What if it was true? What if the asylum, the shard, the reflection, all of it, was a construct? Why? She whispered. To test the threshold of sustained trauma, the woman answered coldly. To explore the limits of perception under simulated conditions. You responded well, until the breach. The breach? The point at which you began to suspect the narrative, the woman said. Your mind rejected the simulation. That is a common fail state. You were approaching full recursive awareness. If allowed to continue, the loop would have collapsed, in on itself. Marin stared, trembling. This isn't possible. But the room didn't flicker, didn't dissolve. There were no mirrors, no reflections, just her, the woman, and a camera in the corner. blinking red. She approached it slowly. "Who's watching me?" she asked. The woman didn't answer. "Who designed this? Who gave you the right?" Still nothing. Marin turned to face her fully. "Do you even exist?" She lunged. But before she reached the woman, the world glitched. Not a flicker, a shift. Like being yanked sideways through a thought. She was back in the asylum. Alone. The halls were decayed again. The mirrors shattered. Blood smeared on the walls. She fell to her knees, gasping, hands in her hair. What was real? Was anything real? From somewhere deep in the building, a voice echoed. Her voice, screaming for help. She stood, trembling, and followed it. Each step dragged her deeper into the maze of her own mind. Rooms shifted, morphed, doubled back on themselves. Memories fused with hallucinations. Doors led to impossible spaces. Her childhood bedroom connected to the asylum dining hall, which then opened into a windowless corridor made entirely of glass. She reached the center, a round chamber. Every surface was mirrored. Thousands of Marins stared back at her. Young, old, terrified, hollow-eyed, bleeding, smiling. At the center stood the final mirror, cracked, but not broken. Her reflection stepped forward. This time, it wasn't hollow. It looked just like her. Same scars, same eyes, same trembling breath. But this one smiled, gently. "You're not broken," it said. "You're remembering." Marin shook her head. "I don't know what's real anymore." The reflection stepped closer. "Neither do I, but we still have a choice." She frowned. "What choice?" "To escape." "How?" The reflection reached out. The mirror shimmered like water. "You have to walk through, all the way. You can't look back." Marin hesitated. She thought of Isaac, of the vault, of the whisper that had followed her since that night, of the photograph that showed her in 1884, of Vero and the woman and the patients and the box and walk. The reflection whispered. So she did. She stepped into the mirror and fell. Darkness swallowed her. But this time, it was warm, like earth after rain, like silence that healed instead of haunted. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying in a hospital bed, a real one. A nurse was adjusting an IV. The window beside her let in soft, real sunlight. Birds sang outside. The nurse looked up, smiled. "You're awake," she said. "You've been in a coma for 3 days." Marin blinked. "Where am I?" "St. Vincent's. You were found in an abandoned asylum, dehydrated, delirious. No one knows how long you were in there." "Isaac?" she asked, heart racing. The nurse tilted her head. "No one by that name brought you in." She swallowed. The shard? The vault?" "I don't know what you mean." The nurse gently touched her shoulder. "You've been through a lot, but you're safe now." Marin turned toward the window. For the first time in days, she saw her reflection in the glass. It looked like her. It moved when she moved. But as she closed her eyes, she heard it again. Soft, faint, just beneath consciousness. You cannot bury the reflection. Marin was discharged 3 days later. She didn't speak much. Not to the nurses, not to the doctors, not even when a detective asked her how she had gotten into the asylum. They all assumed trauma had silenced her, and maybe it had. But it wasn't the trauma of being trapped in a building, it was the trauma of no longer knowing where her mind ended and the world began. Back in her apartment, everything was exactly as she had left it, except it wasn't. The walls seemed thinner, like they were breathing. The floors creaked in different tones. When she turned on her faucet, the water didn't splash, it whispered, and the mirrors. She had covered them before, smashed most of them. Now, they were all back, polished, clean, waiting. She didn't look into them for 2 days. Not until the knock. It came at 3:27 a.m. 3 sharp taps, followed by silence. She opened the door slowly. Isaac stood there, but not the same Isaac. This one looked older, tired. His eyes, once sharp, were clouded with something she couldn't name. He wore a black coat, dusted with ash, and when he stepped into her apartment, the air seemed to bend around him. "You made it back," he said, looking around. "That's rare." "I don't know if I made it back," she said. He nodded. "That's more honest." They sat in the kitchen, no lights on, only the dim glow from the hallway. Isaac placed something on the table between them, a shard of glass. It pulsed faintly. "You were never supposed to carry it," he said. "But the machine, Varro's loop, cracked you open. Let it in." Marin stared at the shard. "Is it still inside me?" Isaac nodded once. "You can't cut it out. You can't forget it. The only way out now is through." "Through what?" "The last reflection." Marin's pulse quickened. Isaac leaned forward. "There's a place no one goes, willingly. Not the asylum, not the mirror rooms, not even the vault. It's the true origin, the root of the recursion, the place where Varro first touched something that broke time." Marin's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Where?" Isaac's eyes met hers. "It's not a place. It's a moment she didn't understand." "What moment?" "The first time you saw yourself," he said, "and didn't recognize what you were looking at." They drove through the night, out past the city limits, past abandoned farmhouses and half-forgotten towns. The landscape became unfamiliar, hills rising in strange symmetry, trees leaning at unnatural angles. And then, the road just ended. A field stretched out before them. In its center, a single standing mirror. No frame, just the glass, buried at the base in the soil, rising like a monolith. It hummed softly. "This is it," Isaac said, stepping out. Marin followed, her breath forming clouds in the cold dawn air. "This mirror doesn't show your reflection," Isaac said as they approached. "It shows your origin, not who you are, who you were." Marin stared at the glass. It was black, no reflection, just endless depth. "What do I do?" she asked. "You step in. If you come out the other side, you'll know what's real and what was made to keep you caged." She hesitated. She remembered the screams, the loops, the false awakenings, the moment she was told she was patient 42, the mirror that showed her in 1884. She stepped forward and stepped through. Darkness again, but not empty. She was in a room, old, wood-paneled, filled with books and candlelight. A woman sat at a desk, writing. Marin walked closer. The woman looked up, and Marin stopped breathing. It was her, or a version of her, older, wiser, eyes filled with sorrow. She was writing in a thick leather-bound journal. "You came back," the woman said, not surprised. "Who are you?" Marin asked. "I'm you," she said. "The first one." "The first. What?" "The first iteration. The first loop. The version of us that agreed to forget, to let them experiment, to break us open and see what falls out." Marin was trembling. "Why would I ever agree to that?" "Because you believed you were too broken to matter," the woman said. "So you became a vessel for science, for progress, for pain." The candles flickered. "You've seen pieces," the woman continued. "Vero, the vault, the asylum, the glass, but none of it was ever about them." She rose, walked to Marin. "It was always about reclaiming yourself." A sound built behind the walls, the low grinding hum of mirrors shifting, of reflections collapsing inward. The woman took Marin's hands. "You have one last choice," she said. "You can stay in the loop. Let the machine run. Lose yourself again. Or what? You remember everything." Marin shook her head. "I don't want this. I want my life back." "That was never your life," the woman said gently. "That was the dream they fed you while they studied your soul." Tears streamed down Marin's cheeks. "I'm so tired." "I know." "Will it hurt?" "Yes." Marin closed her eyes. "Then let it hurt." The woman nodded once and touched her forehead. White light, blinding. Then silence and breath, real breath. Marin opened her eyes. She was in her apartment. Morning light spilled across the floor. Birdsong outside. No mirrors. No shards. Just her, whole. And then her phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "You remembered. We'll be in touch." Marin didn't respond to the message. She stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before finally powering off her phone and placing it in the kitchen drawer. But even with the screen dark, the words still burned in her mind. "You remembered. We'll be in touch." Who was we? What did they want? She tried to go back to her routine. Grocery shopping, walks in the park, journaling, the normal things people do to convince themselves that life is stable, predictable. But nothing felt normal anymore. She saw faces in puddles that didn't match her own, heard footsteps on quiet streets that vanished when she turned, and the dreams, always the same, a hallway of mirrors, a voice whispering her name in reverse, and at the end of the corridor, a door with no handle, just a tiny brass plate etched with 2 words, "Patient, 0." One night, she woke with a start, breath ragged, sheets soaked in sweat, and there it was, on her nightstand, the shard, not a dream, not a memory, the same glass shard from the asylum, sitting beside her alarm clock, as if it had always been there. She picked it up. No blood, no hum, just silence. But when she held it up, she didn't see her reflection. She saw him, Vero, sitting in a chair, facing her, smiling. Then he spoke, and his voice echoed directly into her mind. "You still don't know the full truth, do you?" The shard grew hot. Marin dropped it with a gasp. The sound it made wasn't glass hitting wood. It was metal striking stone. She knelt slowly, but the shard was gone. Only a burned outline remained where it had touched the surface. That was the final sign. The veil was breaking again. That night, the doorbell rang. No one should have been there. No one could have been there. But when she looked through the peephole, she didn't see a person. She saw a mirror leaning against the hallway wall. Her hand trembled as she opened the door. No one, just the mirror, same one from the field. Tall, frameless, black glass. She touched it. It was cold, and then it whispered, "This is the last threshold." She stepped back. Her heart thundered in her chest. "No," she whispered, "no more." But the mirror pulsed with soft blue light, like a heartbeat calling to her, and the wall behind it was gone. There was no hallway anymore, only the mirror, and what lay beyond it. She stepped through. It was the asylum again, but different. It was pristine, clean, bright. People moved through it in white coats, taking notes, tending to patients with calm, purposeful grace. This was not the ruin she remembered. This was before the collapse, before the suffering, before the experiments turned into recursion. Sign above the door read VARR, OWINSTITIUTEMPORPSYCHO, She wandered through the hall, like a ghost, unseen. In one room, she saw Isaac, younger, vibrant, full of idealism. He was arguing with a colleague about the ethics of temporal projection exposure therapy. "It's not a therapy," he said sharply. "It's a cage. We're dressing up as treatment." Another voice answered, "You forget the patients volunteered." And Isaac's reply, "They didn't know what they were volunteering for." Then he looked toward the mirror in the room. For a moment, their eyes met. Even though he couldn't see her, something in him seemed to know. He turned away. Further down the hall, she found a door marked SUBJECTZER. Oh, her hand hovered over the handle. It opened by itself. Inside was a single bed, a single chair, and a single mirror facing the bed. Straps on the mattress, cameras in the corners. A clipboard sat on the chair. She picked it up. Subject name, Marin Graves designation, 0 point. Host symptom, onset, spontaneous, mirror recursion. Trigger, uncontrolled ethical, override, approved staff clearance required. Level 9 plus, her knees buckled. She sat on the edge of the bed, and that's when the final voice spoke from the mirror. But it was her voice, not the fractured reflections, not the looped illusions, just her, clear, real. "You volunteered," the voice said, "to forget the pain, to let them use you, because you didn't believe your life had meaning." Tears filled her eyes. "But you were wrong," the voice continued. "Your suffering had weight. Your mind held power, and they couldn't control it forever." The room began to flicker. The walls peeled away, and beneath the asylum, beneath all the layers, was her, sitting in a chair, wearing white, eyes open, watching herself sleep. The final loop. Marin stood before herself, the true self, unshackled from memory and madness. And the reflection said, "It's time to wake up." "I don't understand," Marin whispered. The woman, herself, stood still in the chair, eyes wide open, watching, not blinking, not breathing. "You're me," Marin said. The version of her in the chair nodded. "The first you. Thought I already met the first one. That wasn't the first. That was a projection, a comfort, This is the core. Marin stepped closer. So I'm, what, a copy? You're the echo, the voice said calmly. A layer built on top of me to carry the pain when I couldn't anymore. I don't want to be an echo, she said. I want to be real, the core. Marin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then take it back. How? End the loop. The room around them began to tremble. Lights flickered overhead. The ceiling dissolved into a dark sky filled with shifting constellations, unfamiliar stars spinning in patterns Marin's mind struggled to make sense of. The recursion has run too long, the core said. It's collapsing. Then wake up, Marin pleaded. End it. I can't, the core replied. You're the one outside the dream now. You hold the shard. Marin turned. There it was again, in her hand. She didn't remember picking it up, but there it was, humming quietly in her palm, glowing with that soft, impossible blue light. What do I do? She whispered. The core Marin's voice was barely audible. Choose. The walls cracked. The mirrors shattered, one by one, their glass folding inward like water. Through the fragments, she saw every version of herself. The girl in the field, the woman in the asylum, the ghost in the vault, the observer, the patient, the survivor, all watching, none blinking. And then, the final mirror remained, unbroken, waiting. She approached it. This one didn't reflect her. It reflected a room, clinical, bright, unfamiliar. But she could hear voices coming from it, clear as glass. She's stabilizing, said a woman. Heart rate. Returning to baseline, said another. Can she hear us? We don't know. Marin reached out, and for the first time since the beginning, her hand passed through glass without resistance. White light, and then breath. Real breath, air in her lungs. Sharp, clean. She gasped and opened her eyes. Blinding lights above her, the scent of antiseptic, the quiet hum of machines. She was lying in a bed, a real bed. Monitors on either side, Fu in her arm. A team of people stood around her. Scientists, doctors, not dream figures, not fragments, real people, human. She's awake, one whispered. Another tapped rapidly on a console. The host iteration has completed the cycle. Marin sat up slowly. It felt like climbing out of an ocean of mirrors. What is this? The lead doctor stepped forward. A tall woman with silver hair and a badge that read, Dr. Elise Vero. You've been part of a recursive cognition study, she said. You volunteered 3 years ago. Marin's voice trembled. That can't be true. I was in the asylum. You ran experiments on me. I saw you. You saw simulations, Elise said. Fragments of memory we stitched together. You're not the patient. You're the host. The first consciousness to stabilize long enough to observe the full structure. Marin stared at her. None of it made sense. All of it made sense. You said I volunteered? Yes, Elise said, softer now. You had a rare condition, temporal identity disorder. You didn't want to be you anymore. You begged us to fracture your consciousness so you could start over. Marin closed her eyes, and she remembered the clinic, the interview, the consent forms, and the question, are you willing to lose yourself, to find yourself? Marin spent the next several days in recovery, She learned more than she ever wanted to about the study, about the simulations, about herself. She wasn't patient 42. There was no asylum in the 1800s. There was no endless loop. There was only her, fractured 1,000 times, trying to find her way back to the moment she chose to disappear. The mirrors were her memories. The recursion was her own defense mechanism. She hadn't been trapped. She had been hiding. On the 7th day, she was cleared for discharge. Dr. Vero walked her out. "I know this has been disorienting," the doctor said, "but you've given us more insight than we ever imagined." "Are there others?" Marin asked. Vero hesitated. "Not anymore. You're the only one who returned." Marin looked at her. "Then destroy the mirror." Vero raised an eyebrow. "We can learn so much more." "No," Marin said firmly. "You built a prison for the mind. Just because someone volunteers for it doesn't mean it's not cruel." Vero nodded slowly. "We'll suspend the project." "Not suspend it. Bury it." The doctor didn't respond, and Marin walked away. That night, in her apartment, Marin sat on the floor. No mirrors, just her, breathing, alive. She picked up a pen and wrote something in her notebook. "I left pieces of myself in glass. I shattered to survive. But now, I gather them, and I become whole." A knock on the door broke her thought. She opened it. No one was there, but on the floor, a single shard of glass, and it was pulsing, blue. The shard pulsed in her hand, soft, blue light, like the glow of a distant star trying to speak. Marin stood in the doorway, apartment behind her, city in front of her, and the past clinging to her palm like a second heartbeat. She could have dropped it, could have smashed it right there on the concrete, and walked away, but she didn't, because deep down she knew this wasn't just a piece of glass. It was the last thread, the final tether between the life she was living and the life she chose to forget. The recursion hadn't fully ended. There was one loop left, one reflection unbroken, and she had to face it. Marin didn't call the institute, didn't warn anyone. She wrapped the shard in cloth and took a train, north, past the lights of the city, past the noise and the safety of knowing what was real. She arrived at dawn, same field, same tree line, and there it was, the mirror, not buried, not gone, standing tall like it had never moved, never aged, never fractured. She stepped into the grass, and the wind whispered a name, 0. The mirror didn't show her face. It showed a chair, a corridor, a voice, humming a lullaby. She recognized the tune. It was the one her mother used to sing, back before everything broke. The mirror was open again, and waiting. She stepped through, for the last time. The asylum was empty now. No patients, no screaming, no memory loops, only silence. And at the center of it all, a single room glowing with soft white light. Inside, a chair, a table, and a second Marin. Not the fractured version, not the observer, not the ghost, the original, whole. Her eyes were closed, and she was smiling. Marin approached slowly. The woman didn't move, but the room felt peaceful, final. On the table lay a sheet of paper, handwritten. She picked it up and read, "If you're reading this, it means you made it through. I'm sorry for everything I put you through, but I had to break to understand how to be whole. You carried the weight when I couldn't. Now, I can carry it with you. I remember now. I am you, and you are me. Let's not run anymore. A tear rolled down Marin's cheek. She placed the shard on the table, beside the note. It stopped pulsing, turned clear, and slowly, like ice melting in reverse, it dissolved into the air. The recursion was ending, by choice, not by force. Back in her apartment, weeks later, Marin stood before a mirror, just a regular one this time. No hum, no glow, just her. And she smiled, for real. Not because she'd escaped, but because she had returned from the deepest corners of her own mind, from manufactured madness, from experimental oblivion, from every identity she had shattered to protect the one that mattered most, the one that could live. She brushed her fingers over her reflection. No distortions, no ghosts, just Marin. She whispered, "We made it." Later, on a quiet night, a small, unlisted video appeared on her private channel, just 5 minutes long. No fancy editing, no background music, just her, speaking directly to the camera. "I went somewhere," she said, "and I don't expect you to believe me." I wouldn't have believed it either, but I want to tell you something. If you've ever felt like your mind is a mirror you're scared to look into, you're not broken. You're not beyond help. Sometimes the way back to yourself starts by shattering the lies you built to survive. She paused, then smiled gently. "You're not alone." The video ended. No fanfare, just truth. Months passed. Marin rebuilt her life. Not perfectly, but authentically. She walked through the city without fear. She ate strawberries again. She watched clouds instead of analyzing them. And every once in a while, she would pass a window, see her reflection, and feel the briefest flicker of something old. Not fear, not regret, just a reminder that she was real. One day, she received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside, a photo. Black and white, a hallway, an asylum, a mirror, and on the back, a handwritten line. Some doors stay closed, others wait. Marin stared at it for a long time, then folded it in half and set it gently in the fireplace. She didn't need it anymore because she finally understood. She was never the experiment. She was the escape. And so ends Marin's story, a journey, not through haunted hospitals or sinister labs, but through the fractured corridors of the human mind, through identity and illusion, through trauma and transformation. She didn't defeat the monster in the mirror. She became whole with it, because sometimes the only way out is through, and sometimes the scariest asylum is the one we build in ourselves. But there's always a way back if we dare to remember, if we choose to wake up. If this story gripped you, made you feel something, or helped you reflect, please like, comment, and share it with someone else who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more immersive, emotional, and mind-bending stories just like this. Until next time, sleep well and beware the mirrors.